give us 2 minutes each of what do you love, what's the focus of the fund, and then we're going to jump into questions and continue chatting. It's very free flow. Oh, and this damn fucking chair. And I will offer you the same offer that I offered Andy if you saw that. If you'd like, yes. Would you like some more? Well, if anybody would like some, I do have at any time.
You got a sniffer? No, I'm fine. But, okay, all right.
Okay, so Anu, could you take it away while you take a sip of that? Anu, would you give us a little bit of?
Sure.
Great.
So thanks so much first for having me.
Absolutely.
So I am the founding partner of F-Cubed, Female Founders Fund, which is a seed stage fund focused on investing in companies founded by women in technology. Primarily based in New York. We, write seed stage checks, so anywhere from 75 to 150K. And the fund's thesis is that when you invest in really great female founders, you can get a great venture backable return.
So I'll try and be quick. I'm a managing director for Comcast Ventures. We invest on behalf of Comcast, NBC, and Universal. There's really 2 things to understand about our fund. We are a strategic fund, but we behave exactly like a traditional VC firm, and there's 2 things that underpin that. The first is that we get compensated like a traditional VC, and that's only important to relay to you, for entrepreneurs to understand that we're on the same side as the entrepreneur. We're not trying to invest into the company to advantage Comcast's interest necessarily. We do well when the entrepreneur does well. We just want our portfolio companies to do as well as possible. The other thing to understand about us is that we decision make within the partner group. So as far as entrepreneurs working with us, we look and feel exactly like a traditional VC, but the plus point is, and what I think is exciting about the platform is, we can bring the assets of Comcast and NBC and Universal to bear on behalf of our portfolio companies. We get privileged access, and in certain verticals, advertising is an obvious one, video is an obvious one, which I think is one of the reasons that I'm here. We can add value over and above the check.
Fantastic. So also a little bit of perspective, because I'm not sure if you guys were here yesterday, but what I love about this is we had 350 people registered, there's about 100 here, but remember, everything's video going out everywhere, and we also made a book last year that recapitulated all of the wisdom of our panelists and everybody here, and that gets sent out in another way. So this thing doesn't end as we're kind of eating our own dog food at this summit, and so just keep that in the back of your mind as well.
He's warning you, by the way. that was the point of that.
Well, I did it after I gave him the flask. You see how it's all about marketing, Andy. So I'll let Andy take a break a second because we've been talking a little bit and then rope everybody in. So on that, Andy, Andrew, talk a little bit about some of the video companies that you're in, yep. And what are the biggest challenges, of those specifically, and what excites you about those opportunities? Obviously, Comcast is there, so that's the key piece. But personally, it's a personal drive to choose those companies.
Yes, I'll talk about the group a little bit, and then I'll talk about one of my companies just to highlight an example. So we really think about it in relatively traditional buckets of infrastructure and content and monetization. So infrastructure, it's obviously core to our DNA. We move bits around the web as an operating company, so we have a number of investments in things like IP distribution companies. We have invested into semiconductor companies, which is quite rare these days for a range of funds. So we've invested into image capture, little chips that sit behind the cameras in your smartphones for those of us in the room, presumably all of us that have smartphones. And so we step up the kind of the infrastructure layer. If we think about content, we invest into pure play content companies. So we invested into Fullscreen and Tastemade, a couple of better-known MCNs. We've invested into a company called Snag Films. We've invested into companies which are maybe didn't start out as focusing on image as their core USP, but Flipboard, for example, which is becoming increasingly a visual medium. And then in terms of monetization, we're in VHX with Andy and Union Square. And the company that perhaps I'll spend a little bit more time on is a company called Sunday Sky. It's a company that is one of my portfolio companies. which is really about personalized video. So it breaks apart video streams and it reassembles them in intelligent ways to speak personally to the characteristics of the viewer and the impression at the time. So it can be used in a couple of ways. It can be used as by enterprises to do things like explain particularly complicated propositions. So insurance companies, finance companies, medical companies that need to explain really quite complicated things to its users need personalized video that is appropriate to the particular situation of the viewer. And there's an advertising side as well. So if you imagine browsing around through a session on the web, you're interested in a particular set of products, it's possible to present video to you later in that session or maybe even later in the week that reflects back some of the interests that, that you've demonstrated in certain products around the web.
Great. So Anu, I know we talked as we were chatting to get a mixture of people, great people on this panel. What I love is the corporate VC, traditional later I don't know what the non-early stage Series A.
Be careful with the words.
I know, and two more earlier. And so when you have a couple companies in the portfolio that there's a design related, there's culinary related, a bunch of different ones, and to what extent are they leveraging images and video, and how much do they think that's a part of their business?
Sure. So if I was to look through the portfolio, I would say actually the first investment that we made, which I made personally, is probably the one that I think leverages images the most, and that's a company called Loverly, which is in the wedding space. And I think the wedding space traditionally has been quite antiquated. There hasn't been a lot of disruption. And I think when you look at things from a bride's perspective, it's really about, imagination, and it's about kind of visualizing what you want that day to look like. And obviously that's definitely translated into very big advertising spends. And so I think what Kelly, the founder's goal and vision with Loverly is to really try to create a platform which in some ways has a network, because she's aggregating content across, the top wedding blogs and leveraging that to build a community of brides where, you have the advertising element of it, but then you also have commerce on top of it. So I think that that's a very clear case of a company where, images are just so crucial to the customer's experience that it's hard to imagine that it didn't exist before.
So one of the slides I referenced, I think yesterday, was the teen audience and where they're spending their time. We know the names of those companies, Facebook, Snapchat, Pinterest, and other visual places, which I think wouldn't exist without images or video, okay? At least not to the state that they're in. So one question I haven't asked any investors on any of the sessions, and I try to keep some to vary it around, is of the companies that are not really leveraging images and video, do you guys hear at the board level or strategic conversations, maybe we should start with, obviously I have a biased perspective and the summit is biased, but I just wonder, of the companies that are not, obviously there's many that should not, but I think there's many that, like I was talking to Joanne earlier, that she puts one photo on the blog and she writes, well, why not she have all photos? Will it drive more traffic or communicate better? Are there any of the companies that have raised discussions strategically or have come up that says, maybe we should, and how can we? Or maybe it's not in our DNA, should we find somebody to do that? Does that ever come up in any of your discussions?
I'm talking with a seed company at the moment where the idea of the company is really to innovate. 15 years ago, it would have been a magazine. And today, it's trying to figure out exactly the right blend of static images, video, and text to be the most compelling proposition it can be. And that's maybe a good example of the kinds of conversations that people are going through. There's some subtleties to how you implement in terms of autoplay, in terms of the way that you use audio, in terms of the stills that you use, in terms of the way that you present images through the body of the text, in the way that you present the text relative to these images that can dramatically change the way that people actually choose to consume the media. Video is obviously much more involving. It requires a little bit more of a time and an emotional commitment from the viewer. So you need to tailor the content as well to the particular use case. If it's things like news, where you're trying to ingest as much information in a short amount of time as possible, if you're time constrained, video maybe isn't the most compelling format. But if it's a little bit more discursive, or it is content that we think can live for a much longer life cycle, then much more interesting to use video. And I think the other thing that's interesting is, as a hook for video, established brands, whether people brands or brands or thought leader authorities, really interesting complement to video to pull people into that experience, because you need a little bit of a hook to pull people into committing to longer time periods, 90-second views, for example.
I would say, going back to your earlier comment about BarkBox, even though when I look across the portfolio, there are definitely quite a few companies that don't involve images or video as a core part of their business. One thing that I think all of them have really tried to do is figure out what is the distribution or marketing tool that that their customer base is most attracted to. So, in the early days, you'll test out Pinterest, you'll test out a bunch of different kind of channels, and I think figuring out what is the type of content. Is it video content? Is it, images on Instagram or on Pinterest? I think, that to me is similar to BarkBox. It's a way of thinking through how do you add that layer and make it relevant, and what does your customer base most associate with your brand?
It makes a lot of sense. But on a timing basis, it seems like that's a recent thing. And I don't know. I still don't know what the signal is that happened. Was it Instagram sale, or was it Pinterest? It was a whole trend, which some of us have been, with blinders on in the imaging space for too long, as you know who I'm talking about. But now it seems like everybody's starting to do it. And does anybody recall a signal that everybody says, well, we have to, what's our plan for this? Or it's really actually happening?
Actually, I actually think it's a network effect. You want to go where people are. Right?
But when did it get big? When did it get a big enough? And so that's the hard question, like you said earlier, is you don't know a network until it is.
Yeah, it's recent, right?
That's right. Is it last couple of years?
Last
1 to 2 years, 6 months to 20 months.
Yeah.
So it was an interesting. The reference of BarkBox is great because I didn't get to say it earlier. Where I as you know, I'm very good friends with him, and I helped him in the early days, and I wanted to invest, but I'm so focused. And I said, but I bet you're gonna use. Have images, and I just know it. Evan, I can't. I mean, you're probably right, but we don't have the plans right now. I can't commit to it. I can't say that, which he's great and focused. But I know it. Can't we just do it? You can, Evan, but I can't say now that we're going to do that. And that was the right answer from him. And maybe I should have broken my rule, but I'm trying to.
Yeah, but I actually don't. There was no way to know, right. There was no way to know that there would be dogs who have Instagram accounts that have 1 million followers, right? I mean,
no way to know, but it was just from Dogster and other days. Right? It was just going to happen. Yeah. So maybe it's easy to say now, but that's what I said. That was the exact conversation.
But it goes back to your question, right? Like all these things are blending, right? And so you as an investor can break your rules, and you could come up with a rational thesis because these things are blending so much. You know what there are a couple of companies I have right now that their most effective marketing channel by far is YouTube. By far is YouTube. And you know how they do it? They find someone on YouTube who makes videos that is somewhat related to what they do, and they send them an email and said, hey, will you review our product? And if you review it, we don't care what you say, put a link in the comments. Right? That's it. Right? By far, the conversion rates. I actually shouldn't even tell this secret, right? Because it works so well, right?
That's interesting. That's a perfect example of things that are happening, and that's what I wanted to kind of get to the audience. Not only in the investment, but what are other companies doing? What should companies do? What will get that to the next spike? Do you have any other examples, either of you?
Well, one company that we haven't yet announced, which I think is really interesting, is, again, focused on YouTube and the how-to space. Which in YouTube has just kind of skyrocketed in terms of styling and fashion, and this company is basically creating a mobile video network with tier 1 and tier 2 influencers who are creating very short 30-second to 1-minute videos on how to put on mascara, how various different kind of styling and fashion tips. And it's interesting because, again, you have the network effect. You don't necessarily need to start with, the most well-known influencers, but they bring their own audience.
Right.
And, it's not a traditional advertising model in that they've already kind of signed up with brands. So, how do you cuff a sleeve properly? With Jenna Lyon from J. Crew. Talking to J. Crew, video is actually by far their most effective advertising tool, and they just don't have enough platforms to use video as a tool. So, to me, that company hasn't launched yet and can't name it, but it's a really interesting way of kind of leveraging YouTube's existence, but also acknowledging that 60% of YouTube videos are still viewed on web and not on mobile. So that's an interesting company, which I think is kind of taking advantage of.
That's great.
I was just going to make a slightly different point. I think we're seeing so much activity, and will continue to see activity. I think it is a single inflection point. I don't think it'll be a pendulum swing back again, because it's not that long since mobile network. It's the interplay between mobile and the load on the networks that comes from video and images. Mm-hmm. And it's not that long since mobile networks have been able to support this kind of content. And then it needs a year or 18 months for entrepreneurs to figure out what to do with this new capability. And so things like autoplay in the Facebook stream, things like Instagram, things like Snapchat, just takes a little bit of time for the ecosystem to figure out. Even Gmail's innovations around inbox and just threading photos into the stream, it's taken some time, and I now think all of that stuff is coming to market. It's clear that the future of web is going to be far more visual.
You're giving me a flashback to a 10K file taking 10 minutes to download it on a 96 baud modem. Right. What's that sound? Can anybody make that sound? Come on, Andy.
They don't even know what you're talking about.
I know they don't. They're young. So anybody have questions? I'm going to keep on asking questions, but I'd love it to make it interactive. We've got about 12 minutes left. So feel free to raise your hand if you've got questions. What questions do you guys have for each other? I have one while you guys start thinking about questions. So, since the most important thing to me, and I think to all of us, is it's all about the people. It's all about the entrepreneurs. It's all about you guys and us. What do you love and hate about your job?
So I can start.
Good. Shit! Sorry.
So... I'll start with what I love. So I would say the part that I love about my job is, obviously meeting entrepreneurs and kind of seeing what, over time, new business models emerging, new industries that are being disrupted. And as an investor, I think you have the advantage, unlike an operator, where you're very singly focused, of kind of getting to see a little bit of everything. I think what I really dislike about my job is that you spend a significant portion of time saying no, and having been an entrepreneur before, in some ways it goes against kind of your makeup, which is to try to help and build things and help people. And so I would say that's something that I'm still trying to get better at.
That's great.
So I'm terrified of being bored in my job. I have been in jobs where I have been bored, and it's a horrible place to be. This job is fascinating. You're always intellectually challenged. You're very rarely the smartest person in the room. People are explaining. It's an incredible privilege to have a job where people are explaining their deepest passions to you and providing you with insight all day. So there's incredible intellectual variety. That's the highlight of my job. There really aren't many lowlights. I do love what I do. I think if I was to point to anything, it's a slow cycle in terms of seeing the fruits of your work. So you only start to see in 5 or 6 years' time really how good you are. It would be nice to have a shorter kind of cycle of feedback, I would say.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I can't stand, going from, well, at least you didn't curse like me. Mine came out. Going from the entrepreneur, I think we've all been entrepreneurs. So this is a great operator/investor group, which I love. The biggest thing I struggle with is when I was entrepreneurial you daily, weekly felt like you either were moving the ball forward quickly, slowly, or not at all, or going backwards. You knew. There were metrics that you really knew. And doing this, I've gotten used to it, and I love it, but it is a whole different game, of which you're also not in control. You have a perception that you're more in control as an entrepreneur, and you might be, but we're never really in control. Right.
You know, related to that, the thing that I think is pretty interesting about venture is that it's a really it's a near perfect system for allocating very risky capital, right? And so your question was, what do you love about it? One of the things that I love about it is that we are in the business of constructing portfolios, right, that hopefully are diversified in a manner that we define. But we're not in the business of having to be right all the time. We're actually probably in the business of having to be right once every 5 years, and so that's a pretty interestingly constructed environment, which I like. The thing I dislike the most is exactly that, right? Which is that you're going to, if you're good at it, you're probably going to be wrong 70, 80, 90% of the time. And that also that creates, you know, the relationship between us and our companies is vastly asymmetrical. You know,
right. I mean, so that's why I ask it, because we talk frequently on many of these different panels I like talking about because of our dual perspective. And everybody here, what's the perspective of the entrepreneur of the investors? What's the investor's perspective? What do you like and dislike? And that's how we try to figure out how we can work together. Well, because there's not everybody's a good fit.
The success of your company, like I invest in you and I invest in 23 other companies in constructing a portfolio. The success of your company is kind of irrelevant to me, to my portfolio, right? But the success of your company is actually all you have, right? So I find one way to resolve that is just to be upfront about that, right? To be upfront that that's the relationship.
Which is why I like bringing it up here, because it is a real thing, and they're all relevant. But it actually is not life or death, I think, is the situation, right? So you want, I mean, it's a percentage game where you're building a portfolio and everybody working together to try to figure out how to make them all successful as a goal, ideally. But the numbers are numbers, right? But they're not going to be, right?
They're not going to be.
Right, you're absolutely right. Questions in the audience? Yes, great, over there. Stand up.
I will do.
Great.
Andrew, I just dropped my iPhone, but that's okay. Andrew, I have a question for you.
Andy or Andrew?
Andrew.
That one.
Yeah.
Andy.
Andy. I knew you were looking at Andy, so I'm glad I clarified.
I'm glad to. It will be quite an irrelevant question, maybe. But you've mentioned earlier about investing in network businesses. And the good thing about network businesses is that they are very defensible and you have great barriers to entry. Fantastic. At the same time, usually it's winner takes it all markets. And that really increases the risk. So do you think that is a quite high-risk strategy, and how do you mitigate that risk?
Yes, it is a high-risk strategy, and we're not in the business of mitigating. We accept that risk because that's the risk that drives returns that are meaningful to our investors, you know, to allow them to invest in an illiquid security where they won't see return for 10 years. I mean, that's the dynamic that we want, right? I don't know if things are... I have a question in my mind, and we talk about this at USV, whether things are still winner-take-all or winner-take-most, but that's separate. But that's a dynamic... You know, binary outcomes drive the returns that make our investors happy. And if our investors are happy, we are happy. And if our investors aren't, we aren't. And so I don't... That's a feature, not a bug, maybe. Now, the more interesting question to me is that that's not necessarily a mode that is appropriate, or that's not necessarily a mode that every entrepreneur should aspire to, right? And so there are lots of flavors of running a business. There are lots of flavors of being an entrepreneur. There are lots of flavors of financing your company. There are lots of flavors of exiting and getting liquid from the investment you make in your company. We are just one flavor, but we're a flavor that requires outsized return, or it doesn't work.
Any other questions? Yes, great up here. Mike is coming your way, Jeffrey.
It's for mainly Andrew. You mentioned that companies are only now utilizing the bandwidth of mobile networks, and with the gigabit networks coming, I saw a demonstration of Google Fiber, and they were just playing 10 videos at the same time, which is not really what people are going to be doing. So have you started to see what people are going to be actually doing with this besides higher resolution or the boring stuff?
There certainly is higher resolution. It may be boring, but 4K is going to stress these networks. These networks are, I don't think it's that well known by the general public how stressed these networks are by the rise of video. It's really pretty dramatic, and the network operators are having to invest large sums of money to keep pace and to make sure that people get the experiences that they need. 4K is going to be interesting. Augmented reality is going to be interesting. VR is going to be interesting. These are all very bandwidth intensive applications that are going to stress the network. But I'd say even more than that, and just to take our US hats off for a second, you think about the infrastructure internationally, and the fact that plenty of people in the world can't access some of the most basic picture-oriented services, that is also a challenge.
Any other questions in the audience? Like I said earlier, if you don't raise your hand, we don't know who you are. Any questions among here? I have more, because I'm not lacking.
Go for it.
Go for it. Okay.
We ask questions all day.
I know.
We're tired by now.
No comment. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, the virtual reality, augmented reality. I know you mentioned in the email that you don't have any of those, but I just wanted. It seems like a latest trend, and what do we think about it? Is it really here this time? Let's say virtual reality and the wearing Oculus, and is it really going to meet the hype within the next 2 years, or are we, for anybody who wants to talk about it, or is it really going to take another 10 to 20 years? Anybody want to answer?
Yeah, I'll give you.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll give you my personal point of view, because my group is quite split around this point.
I think a lot of people are split. That's what I want. So just individually is in perspective.
Yeah, so our group has spent time with Oculus. Our group has spent time with Magic Leap, two of the more interesting companies in the space. It feels magical when you experience these services. My personal point of view is that it's going to take a long time, longer than people expect. It's going to be fundamentally world-changing, but it's going to take a long time. And I think, investing is partly about understanding when to invest. And so I think these are very important technologies. I think in 30 years' time, they're going to change the way our world works in many, many ways.
So, Andrew, I agree. I got to jump in, because the definition of a long time for you, an entrepreneur, my sister, me, and everybody else in this room, is totally different. It's the same kind of question of what's a lot of money. A lot of money is very different to every single person in this room. There's enough money to eat, and there's plain money. Yeah. They're different. So what's a long time to you? It's going to take a long time to get to the tipping point that we just talked about images really being marketing and trending. When does that happen for VR? Roughly, within 10 years, 20 years. I mean, like time frame. Are we 5 years, 10 years, 30?
Let me answer it slightly differently, which is, in order for us to be interested, we need to see something happening within the next 4 years.
Forget Comcast.
Oh, forget. Okay. All right. So
when is it going to happen? Which then relates to when you'd be interested, obviously. But when's it,
Clearly,
I
don't have an answer for that, but let me give you just a stab in the dark.
I'm tough sometimes.
I think the technology will arrive ahead of scaled usage, because I think the content will take time.
Agree?
I think creating that corpus of content that's really interesting is going to take 6, 7, 8 years before we're really using these services on a daily, weekly basis.
6 to 8 years. Mm-hmm. Okay. What do you think?
I have no idea.
Any idea?
I have no idea.
Yeah, so I'll play the discussion, because I asked the question. So, I'm trying to figure this out, because I'm looking at a lot of these companies, I'm putting them on, and I think it's fascinating, and I get dizzy sometimes, and, what are the use cases other than a couple of the obvious ones, which are the leading edge of all technologies anyway. Yeah. But I think it's going to be infrequently used. I think immersive images and VR and the content is going to be unbelievable world-changing but I think it's going to take much longer, because I don't think enough people will use it for 10 to 15 years.
You know what's an interesting question is that, I think it's hard. The pace of change is so ridiculous. It really is hard to. It's hard to predict anything. But so one thing though that you can do is I look at, you know, we have a incredibly healthy and rich ecosystem for entrepreneurs to exist as entrepreneurs, and it didn't exist 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and it sure as hell didn't exist when I started in the business. You know, and so entrepreneurs are really freaking smart. Like, I just watch what they do, right? Like, that dude's building that camera, right? And so I wouldn't have thought of that camera with like 6 things. And so I'm like, they'll fill gaps, you know, in ways that I think we don't see because we're up at a higher level. And that to me is maybe a little more indicative, you know?
Sure.
And so,
no, I think you're absolutely right. I'm just getting, you know, I don't like putting set times, but I've been bleeding edge a little too often with my article in 2003 that camera phones replace point-and-shoot cameras and other ones. And, I was right, but I was just, you know, just different, wrong time. I'm right about satellite. It might not be our lifetime, the satellite selfie, but I think I'm right. You know, I mean, I don't need to be right. But so we're just out of time, but I have 2 questions that are short answers, just to what I frequently do, and I like the mixture of everybody's different views. One is, give me in one-word answers the personality trait that you love and hate. We talked about this earlier. And then the second question will be, I'll ask it afterward. Let's focus on this. The one word you love and hate, the personality trait of entrepreneurs. Anu?
Hustle.
Hustle is what you love. That's great.
So I love it because, you know, I think that you need it as an entrepreneur to kind of, you have to be resilient and to be able to keep going with a lot of rejection. But, you know, sometimes it can be annoying. So you love and hate the same word. Well, we got a trend going on here, Andy. You started this trend. Andrew?
Transparency, and that means intellectual honesty to me. I find that entrepreneurs tend to divide into 2 camps. One is, here's my business, here are my challenges, let's figure through this together, and kind of fake it till you make it. And I prefer working with the former. Great. Andy, you already did yours. You want to go again? You're sticking to it. Good man. All right, then you can start on the next one. So on the last one, the closing one is one sentence of entrepreneur hats, not VC hats, the operator hats. The one sentence advice to entrepreneurs building a business. And it might be the same for both hats, but put the entrepreneur hat on with all your experiences. What's the advice? Just one sentence. Oh I just like sound bites. Anybody want to go? Andy's thinking.
I can go.
Go.
So my one piece of advice would be to surround yourself in whatever capacity you can, advisors, mentors, investors, hopefully, with people who are knowledgeable about the industry that you're entering. Majority of entrepreneurs I meet don't necessarily come from the industry, and I think that's a good thing. So if you don't and you're willing to disrupt, then try to at least get market knowledge by the community around you.
Great. Set 3-month, 6-month, 12-month goals. Make sure they're consistent. You don't have to stick to them religiously. You can alter them on the field of battle as circumstances change. But quite often you'll sit down with an entrepreneur and they'll sketch out what they're trying to do now and where they think they'll be in a year, and there isn't a coherency.
Okay, great advice, Andy.
I think you know, to think, you know, give a lot of thought to whether when you hear no, whether that's a positive indicator or a negative indicator. You know, and be really kind of honest in thinking about it, because it often in different circumstances it's both.
That's great. And so I want to riff on that on mine, and then we'll end this. In my mind, no never means no. It means not now. Until you evolve to either validation from customers, significant others, or parents in anything in life, no never means no. It's just not a yes yet. The yes could take a long time, but that's my advice. So round of applause. Thank you very much. Fantastic. Awed with this panel. And we're moving on. Thank you very much.